So normally I like to start off on a good note and like explain shit and give it all a theme. But to be very honest, I'm looking at the list of shit I'm supposed to be talking about today and okay, can I see any real similarity? Okay, yeah, yes. Now I can finally see a good protruding theme. So let me just kick things off by saying this episode is about nutting. You know, it's not a sex related episode, but it's about nutting. Okay, actually, it's mostly about fucking around, but, nutting just sounded a little bit better. Either way, I think we need to start things off on a less than wild note because the episode itself, if there's a lot of fucking around, then you don't know where it's going to go. So we might as well start things off from a less wild note, and I will start things off from England, where there is a 25-year-old man by the name of Liam Brown who recently pled guilty to having sex with a cow. Okay, maybe I kind of should have not started with this one because this one's actually pretty wild. But on the plus side, I actually get to milk this story, pun intended.
Get ready for the battle of the sexes.
Imagine that. From the country that colonized so many countries in this world, you have a 25-year-old man looking at a cow and deciding, you know what, I'm a little bit horny and I can give it some pipe. It gives me meat so I can give it some meat. Like, that shit's wild as fuck though. But anyways, let me just read the story real quick. So it says, and I quote, "A man from the United Kingdom pled guilty to having sex with a young calf on a farm in Burton, England. 25-year-old Liam Brown pled guilty to sexual penetration with a living animal and causing unnecessary suffering. Per the Daily Mail, landowners installed alarms and surveillance cameras amid concerns of the well-being of their livestock. Brown was allegedly apprehended on the property, while a DNA report from the scene confirmed what had occurred at the farm. The farmers told the court that Brown's relatives worked on the land and they have known him since he was a child. Brown's initial hearing at the Poole Magistrates Court has been transferred to Bournemouth Crown Court. Brown, who had no previous convictions, hasn't returned to the farm since the incident and his sentencing will take place on September the 22nd. End quote. Alright, alright. This particular incident kind of gives me a little bit of relief. Like, I know it's not a particularly good thing, it's actually quite wild, but even with that said, like, it just seems a little bit wild though. Like, imagine going to look at a cow and thinking that just because you were horny and it made a sound, it was suddenly in the mood. Like, granted, the guy is, serving meat just the same way he probably takes it from the cow, but then again, that statement just sounded wrong and it almost sounds like the guy, also takes it from the back. But hey, the joke had to be dropped there. Something had to give. Because besides making jokes about this shit, I feel like this guy actually needs to be accused of more than just having sex with a cow. Because this isn't just bestiality, it's bestiality and also potentially pedophilia. Because it's not that he just had sex with a cow, he had sex with, get this, a young calf. Like, dude going for kids is already bad enough as is, but the guy went for an animal child. Like, that shit is wild as fuck though. And the guy can't even say if the calf liked it or not because at the end of the day, it was a kid, so it couldn't even give consent. So technically, not only has this guy raped an animal and, just so happened to commit bestiality, he has managed to do a bunch of pedophilia. And worst of all, I don't even think the dude pulled out. Because I don't think the guy used this shit with protection. Because by the time you're going to get protection to shag a cow, I think that's already just as much worse as whatever the hell the guy did. Like, either way, whatever the hell this guy did was wild as fuck. And I don't think I'm gonna have any more wild shit for the rest of the podcast, which I think I should have started in a probably less wild manner, with a little bit more civilized behavior, starting in a nicer way by saying, welcome to Breaktime on our side, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who's all about his beef, even though with this one, he can't get any more out of it. Yeah, that joke? Anyways, let's move things on. He's a man who can sometimes find it hard to breathe if you've got that asthma. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This show started on the wildest ride ever. Like, imagine you deciding, you know what, let me sit down, start doing some work, or, you know, I'm gonna take a drive with my kid and have something play in the background, you know, just to kind of kill the silence. And then all of a sudden, the first thing you hear within the first 2 minutes is about how some white guy fucked a cow. Like, this shit is wild though. And granted, I don't think I've dealt with a wild story like this in a bit of a while. So it was a little bit refreshing. Plus, I feel like most of those jokes were just rolling off the tongue. And what better way to make lemonade out of a lemon of a situation than to make a bunch of jokes? Or at least in this case, you know, like turn it into some butter, or, you know, like make some cheese, but you don't have to pose for it and shit. Either way, I actually kind of like that story. I hope you did too. And, you know, as usual, there's gonna be a bunch of relationship stuff that I'm gonna have to start talking about on the main topic. But before I get to that, I want to at least start things off on a not as bad note, also not as wild. Now, I recently saw a story about a UFC champion known as Sean O'Malley, who said that he can cheat on his wife because, get this, he pays for everything. Now, of course, I feel like this is some shit that dudes say online, and I feel like some red pill content creators have kind of put this out there and made it seem like it's supposed to be a thing. But I have some thoughts on it, but let me just read the story real quick. So it says, and I quote, "I'm a king, I pay for everything." O'Malley said as a guest on Bradley Martin's Raw Talk podcast, "I treat Danya like a queen. If I get a little pussy on the side, what does that have to do with anything? I have testosterone running through my veins. It's simple." End quote. The recently crowned UFC bantamweight champion has long been in an open relationship with his wife, Danya Gonzalez, and he once claimed that they have dope threesomes together. O'Malley said his success in the octagon, which includes a shocking knockout victory over Aljamain Sterling to claim the UFC bantamweight championship on Saturday, has a lot to do with what he pleases to do outside of it. "If I wasn't paying for everything, if I wasn't, you know, successful in any sort of way, and I was just like maybe an average Joe, I probably wouldn't. It probably wouldn't be fair. But I'm fucking King Kong, baby," O'Malley said. O'Malley referenced Andrew Tate for his thought process regarding polygamy. He says, and I quote, "Andrew Tate explains it well. It's status. You know I got status, so I can," O'Malley said, potentially referencing this clip of Tate saying that women give men status. End quote. And end of story. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I feel like whenever someone starts talking about, "Oh, you know, because I can pay the bills, now I can fuck whatever babe I want, even though I have a babe," just sounds a little bit odd to me. Like, maybe it's just a me thing, maybe I don't understand it because I don't have the kind of money that they talk of, at least not right now. But when I think about it, the idea of you as a man thinking that because now you've made a shit ton of money, you are now allowed to go and fuck around just seems a little bit odd, because it's not like your dick has like a token slot, or pussies have a token slot where you can now like pay to fuck them, but you feel like you can't do that even when you're broke, which is a little bit weird. It's like you're letting the money dictate your sexual behavior, or at least your behavior in a relationship, which is a little bit odd. It's a little bit odd. And by all means, like, this guy and his wife are supposedly in an open relationship, so, you know, it's not as bad as you might think. But the thing that just made it weird for me is how the guy was talking about how if he didn't have the kind of money, the kind of success that he has, then he wouldn't be fucking around as much. Now, he didn't reference the idea that, you know, other women wouldn't want to sleep with him because he's not successful or has money. It's that he wouldn't be able to do it because he doesn't have, you know, that kind of success or money at that point yet, which just seems very, very odd. It just seems a little bit odd, because now imagine you're one of the babes. Now, assuming that this is even a closed relationship at that point, like, the thought of you as a guy, pretty much, you know, when you're on the grind, as you're busy coming up and you have your babe, you stay faithful to her. Then when you make the money, you're like, alright, fine, now I need permission to cheat because I'm successful and famous. Like, it just seems a little bit odd, because when you think about it, in reality, if that's going to be the case for the many women that are willing to stick by a guy who's on the grind, then now it justifies more and more women trying to look for you when you're a made man. Because it can work out one of two ways with them. So either they will end up with a made man who wants to settle down, isn't about fucking too many bitches and shit, and they stick to them as the one partner, or even though this guy wants to start fucking around, at the end of the day, even though the babe leaves or even though she chooses to stay and they have some sort of agreement, at the end of the day, it's not like she'll have lost as much because she didn't have to grind with the guy. She didn't have to put a bunch of her own shit on hold, because a lot of times we find that some of these women will take a sacrifice. They will sort of sacrifice things from their own lives so that they can help you come up, just the same way your own friends and family definitely will. So for you to do all of that, then get to the top and then suddenly be like, okay, now that I'm at the top of my game and, I could fuck a shit ton more women than I could before, now I'm going to need some permission to do this, or now I'm going to go ahead and do it because if I was broke, I wouldn't have done it. Like, for a lot of babes today who take a lot of pleasure in being monogamous and, like coming up with a guy, that just seems wrong. And if anything, some of these babes are gonna stick to keeping you broke if this is the overall belief for a lot of guys, or they'll just go for you when you're already a made guy. So at the end of it, what the hell is the use of having a day one babe if you're just gonna cheat on her, But anyways, maybe I don't know all that much about this because I haven't gotten to the top of the pyramid so that I can really talk too much about it. But either way, I am going to leave it at that and move things on because we have a main topic that we need to get into. Now, if you're a Kenyan and you listen to this podcast, just raise your hand virtually if you know of the name Rispa Faith. Now, for those of y'all that don't know who or what Rispa Faith is one of the socialites that came out during the big booty era of Kenyan social media, or at least of the Kenyan entertainment scene, if I can call it that. That was sort of started with Vera Sidika back in 2011, and it picked up steam with people like Rispa Faith and Corazon Kwamboka and shit. And at some point, the one thing that could make you famous almost overnight was you having a massive ass and posting it on IG and shit, which is something that, gave her quite a bit of fame. Now, with that said, she has managed to, go along, have the whole fame path, being a socialite, but she recently settled down, had a kid, and she was on, I think it was TikTok Live, busy talking about the experience of her wanting to have a kid, wanting to get pregnant, and not having that opportunity. And while she was busy talking, she just so happened to let it slip that she tried trapping a bunch of men. Now, it seems like while a bunch of people were busy listening to her and the clip, because someone took a clip of that part of the section of her live and posted it up, I think some people were busy paying more attention to the fact that she was talking about how long it took for her to get a kid and the joy of having a kid and getting pregnant and all, that they actually forgot the part where she was actually trapping the dudes. And considering that no one was really trying to point that one out in the comment sections, I figured that one was an issue that I probably should correct on the podcast, because I feel like that's something that needs to be talked about. But before I can really get into it, let me just make sure I play the clip first for you so that you can understand what's said, and then I can get into my breakdown of the entire thing. So without further ado,
nimekuwa na wababa wengi, nimekuwa na maboyfriend wengi, lakini hakuna siku nimeishika mimba. Nimejaribu kutrap wababa wengi sana, but mimba haijawahi ingia. Nilikuwa nadhani mimi ni tasa, ziezi za hatuna nyota ya kushika mimba kwetu, hatukuwa nayo. Lakini Mungu alikuwa anataka niolewe ndio nishike mimba. Nikaolewa, second month after my wedding nikapata mimba bila kustruggle. Hata the first person nilipigia ni sistangu. Nikamwambia Karo nimeshika mimba. Ananiambia Rispa uongo. Nikamwambia chukua motorbike ukuje uone. Karo akakuja na vitu za kupewa mimba 4. Tukapima, ya kwanza iko double, ya pili iko double, ya tatu iko double. Akaniambia yes, umeshika mimba Rispa. Enda sasa uambie Brian. Nikaenda nikamwambia bwana yangu, babe nimeko na mimba. Akaniambia no, hauna mimba. Nikamwambia niko na mimba. Nikamletea hizo vitu akasema ni ukweli.
Okay. So just to give a little bit of context on everything that she said, and hopefully not to take as long as she has, she was busy talking about how she hadn't been able to have a kid in quite a long time, And God wanted her to get married first before she could have a kid. And she tried trapping dudes, she fucked quite a lot of dudes, and she wasn't able to get pregnant. So much so that she actually thought that she was barren and it's like a problem in the family. And then once she got married, second month, she gets pregnant. Sister doesn't believe it, comes over to her place. They do the test a bunch of times and all of them come back positive. And, even the husband didn't believe it and they were happy and shit. Now, all of that said, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I feel like there's some things that just don't need to be put on the internet. But that's sort of besides the point. That one was just a very quick side note that just popped up from the corner of my head when she was saying most of this shit. Or at least when she mentioned the whole, trapping niggas and all. Not that, whether you don't know it's a good or a bad thing, but I don't know if I'd really be comfortable with being open about the fact that I tried to get pregnant from a dude so that I can keep the dude. Like, that just seems a little bit wild to me. Because, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I don't know if I can call it malicious. I don't know if I can call it cold. I don't know if I can call it backstabby. I don't even know if I can call it disgusting. But it's very, very odd to think that there's someone out there who looks at you, wants to be with you, and is willing to bring in another life just so that they can keep you. Like, that shit is wild. It's absolutely wild. Like, imagine trying to explain to your kid, even though I know 99.9999% never really will, explain to the kid that the reason that they exist on the planet is because the mother wanted to keep the dad. And that time you don't even know how the dad turned out. Whether the dad ended up being a great father, a great dad, or ended up being a shitty person because, you got pregnant and he wasn't ready for it. Like, all of that. Imagine you knowing that the only reason you exist is because your mother wanted your dad to stay with her. Like, that's some wild shit. But hey, baby trapping is something that has happened for a lot of people for a particularly long time. And, whether people call it, a strategy for mate retention, whether people will call it just something that happens for a number of people out here, either way, I don't consider it to be a particularly good thing. And it is something that I think I've spoken about on this podcast before, but beyond just talking about it, I feel like it's one of those things that makes a lot of guys very wary about certain women and getting to a certain point in their lives. Because you kind of think about it, like, you start going up, you start making really good money, you get to a position of fame and shit, and suddenly there's someone who's willing to hold on to you at all costs, including taking your nut and turning it into a kid. Like, that shit is wild. It is absolutely wild. And in as much as I'd like to say, the women that do this are crazy bitches and shit, even the least crazy ones usually end up doing the same thing. Like, it's not like you look at them as practically crazy. You just find that there's some that actually want to retain a guy so badly that they keep them. And granted, mate retention is something that women have, kind of been working with and have been developing strategies for since time immemorial. But baby trapping is probably the more extreme version of it. Actually, I think based off of the most that I've heard in terms of mate retention and holding on to a dude by all costs, I think that's the most extreme version. Because it actually involves you trying to include another human being by force, by fire, without the person's consent and without knowing about it. And at the end of the day, like, the whole baby trapping thing is the most extreme version, but there's others that I've heard. There's the more local versions where you find that, a babe receives some amazing pipe from a dude and really, really wants a dude. So all of a sudden she starts, like playing wife or like senior girlfriend, if you can call it that, doing cooking, cleaning up the house, dressing up in the guy's clothing and shit in the house. And this nigga just laid pipe. So dude just laid some premium pipe and shorty does not want to leave this guy at all costs. And that's probably the more light version of it. But there's other ones which can be a little bit more on the extreme side, not necessarily baby trapping, like a story that I read recently about a woman who used to put a nicotine patch on the boyfriend, and whenever the guy would leave, go to his place, like, he wouldn't feel the same. So it's like the guy would go through withdrawals because he was so used to staying at the girlfriend's place, and he would just go back and stay at the girlfriend's place because he'd feel a lot better there. Up until one day, the guy just woke up in the middle of the night. I think he wanted to go and get water or something, and then he noticed the nicotine patch. And apparently, the babe used to wake up earlier than the guy and sleep later than him. So she would put and remove the patch at night and in the morning respectively, which is a very wild story, and is one of many. Like, that one seems a little bit more niche, but when you go out there and you start looking at some of the other stories, there's ones where women have intentionally tried to commit suicide or even made threats of committing suicide if the guy leaves. Like, there's so many different stories of people trying to hold on to someone without letting them go, to a point where it's so unhealthy and it's downright just devious and malicious. And you kind of think about it as a guy, like, you're trying to stack up, you're trying to grow yourself so that you can create a good, strong foundation. And then as you're busy doing that, there's someone else who might be planning somewhere along the course of your journey, when you seem to be doing particularly well for yourself, to trap you so that you can have a child that you didn't intend on having with a person that you didn't intend on having the child with. And then now you're stuck in a certain situation. Like, do you really want to be successful and reach the top of the pyramid though? Like, you kind of end up having to ask yourself that question, because if that's what's waiting for you on the way up, then is it really worth it though? Okay, actually, now when you kind of think about it in the grand scheme of things, it is still worth it. But still, like, do people actually really think through the results of doing such a thing with someone? Like, yes, there was the whole nicotine patch thing, which was just wild. And, fortunately, the guy will recover pretty quickly and he'll be good to go. But you think about it, a baby isn't a nicotine patch. A baby isn't a cry for help. A baby isn't, if you leave me, I'll kill myself. A baby is actually a full-on human being. And unlike things like, the nicotine patches and the attempts at suicide and shit, like, babies are expensive as hell. Babies are a massive responsibility. And especially to think that the babe that you're with, who has your kid, is someone who chose to trap you. I don't think women actually ever really think through, or at least the ones that attempt to do such a thing, ever really think through the aftermath of a situation like this. Because yes, in some situations you will find that the guy will be okay, hell, he might even be happy about it, and he will choose to stay with you and take care of the kid, and you guys can continue living happily ever after. But let's look at the other reality of this. Imagine if this guy knows that you are trying to trap him. Kinda like, I'm guessing all the dudes at Rispa Faith was busy banging, and the ones that didn't have particularly good stroke game, or at least did not have particularly strong sperm, or the ones that did a vasectomy, or even the ones that used their own condoms and shit. Like, do you think that if you actually got pregnant for this guy, they would treat you as well as they treat you, or they treat you better, or even some level of close to the way they treat you? Do you think they'd see you the same? Because let me tell it to you as a guy, if you've been told by a shorty that, I'm pregnant, and it was a pregnancy that you weren't ready for, especially when you're not in the best position to have a kid, or you can see that there's a lot of things that you've planned which are going to be driven off the rails because of that kid, like, beyond feeling scared and, suddenly feeling the weight of that sort of responsibility on you, the first thing that you tend to feel to a certain degree is a sense of resentment, because you did not want that kid in the first place. And the worst part about it is you have no power to not have that kid, because you said you didn't want it and the baby's like, oh, I'm gonna keep that shit. There's a certain sense of resentment that's going to crop up. And for some of those guys, they end up not treating their baby mamas very well, because the relationship doesn't last very long. So now she moves from being a girlfriend or a fuck buddy or a friend with benefits or anything of that sort to just being a baby mama. And they do not treat them all that well. They just make sure that the child is taken care of if they actually care. And does that. Now imagine if they know that you trapped them. It's not all that great, and these babes are having babies by guys that didn't want to have kids, and they're not getting the best treatment. Now imagine them knowing that you intentionally decided to try and get a kid from them all because you want to keep them for yourself. The kind of treatment you will receive based off of the resentment and possible hatred of this man. Like, at the end of the day, the only thing I can really ask is, do you really think that that juice is worth the squeeze? Like, you can have a baby by the dude and you can say you love him and all, but do you really think that it'll ever really be the same? And if you know that it's going to be shitty, but you still want to be with a guy, do you really think the guy is really worth the kind of shit treatment that you'll get? So at the end of it all, like, yes, maybe you want to keep the kid. Maybe you want to have a kid by a certain dude and trap them. But who the hell told you that just because, you know, you're going to have this shared thing with this man that they're going to care for you all the same, if ever? Like, at the end of the day, there's this shit that a lot of women tend to say, whether like, oh, we made this baby together. But a lot of times, I don't think enough of them realize that most times, if guys had it within their power to not have the kid, there would be a fuck ton fewer kids out here in these streets than most of y'all would ever really think of. Like, at the end of the day, if it was up to a guy's power to have sex, hit it raw, and not have the kid, there's a shit ton of guys that would choose that option. But unfortunately, a bunch of these guys decided to trust that the babe does not want to have the kid as well, or, you know, will probably not get pregnant, but even though she gets pregnant, she probably won't choose to keep the kid. And then at some point you hit them with one of their worst fears at the time, and then you put them in a position where now they suddenly have a responsibility that they weren't even prepared for. Do you really think this guy's gonna treat you all that great? So to kind of conclude all of this, I think considering that there's women out here that are busy trying to trap dudes, and at least from the comments it seems like there's a lot of them that don't really care too much about that, let me just say this. Fellas, it seems like you being a great guy, treating another person of the opposite sex really well, can actually get you to a position where they want to keep you by any and all means, and they're willing to produce a baby just to make that reality happen. Now, is there a strategy I would recommend to getting around this entire thing? Not really, because I don't want to tell you to be an asshole to the babe. I do not want to tell you that the moment you're done banging the babe, you tell them to bounce and, you know, you make sure you treat them like shit afterwards, because that would mean that you're treating someone who probably might not even have those intentions in the worst way possible. And, you know, you might actually care about this person after the fact. But either way, we're gonna have to come up with some strategies to get around this entire thing, because there's some women that are willing to have kids for all the wrong reasons. Or, you know, maybe some of these guys actually do want to get the kid. I don't know. Either way, I could be wrong about this shit, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, on Facebook, it is at Breaktime, on Westside, on Twitter, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.